I left my computer out here all night, so how nobody stole it is a miracle.
This wonderful relationship that has nothing to do with how attractive nobody cares about. So read it! Never shows just how small you are.
But what we should be, what the American goal is. So about a year ago, I was obsessed with this actor, Jack Wilde, and I've currently moved on from that obsession to something else.
Unfortunately, due to the algorithm of YouTube,
If I talked about my current obsession,
I could potentially get a lot of clout and or a lot of hate. We're not doing that on YouTube. I had one
viewer
who was interested in a Lidsville HR Pufnstuf comparison. Jack Wilde was an actor who was most famous in the 1970s when he was a young man. He would do teen roles. He was often typecast as the orphan boy in different things such as Oliver, Flight of the Doves, The 14, Melody. But HR Pufnstuf is a TV series that aired in 1969. There are about 17 episodes and one season. Even though I found it last year, it made me feel very nostalgic, so I think that's why I liked it. So it's like a prototype of Barney with like this big stuffed, this big costumed dragon or dinosaur. In HR Pufnstuf, it's a dragon. So it's a big costumed dragon who befriends this boy and all these other costumed creatures on an island where it's like, you know, their own sort of dimension.
and he's like the leader, the mayor, whatever.
It also reminds me of Pete's Dragon, which is a 1970s fantasy, semi-animated musical adventure with people and people in costume puppet-like things. So HR Pufnstuf was the first time that Sid and Marty Krofft tried this thing where they had life-sized puppets mixed with live action. It was really the forerunner of Barney and a lot of other shows. HR Pufnstuf is really similar to Lidsville, and for a year I've wanted to make a video comparing Lidsville with HR Pufnstuf, how they're the same and how they're different. They're about a teen boy in our world who gets a little bit too curious and, through a series of unfortunate events, lands stranded in this fantasy world full of puppets and creatures and
One villainous monster.
who governs everybody. In Lidsville, it's this evil magician named Hoodoo. In HR Pufnstuf, it's this evil witch named Witchy Poo. So they both have kind of similar names, and their costuming is very similar. Every single episode is basically a plot for the main boy character to try to escape the island he's on, only to be foiled by the evil leader. Both HR Pufnstuf and Lidsville have roughly the same voice actors for the characters in puppets. Walker Edmiston, who I know from Adventures in Odyssey, which is a Christian audio drama I grew up with, Walker Edmiston voices like half the characters on both Lidsville and HR Pufnstuf. He does more voice acting for most of the middle Sid and Marty Krofft productions. Also, Lidsville and HR Pufnstuf both include Billy Hayes as a main character.
One little girl said to me, she said, I have pictures of Jack Wilde all over my room, and my mother says he's very homely, and I'm to take those pictures off the wall. What shall I do, Witchy Poo? So I said, well, tell Mama that you must not judge a person's character by the way they look. First of all, he isn't homely, he's a gentleman, and I think perhaps your mother, you know, in this particular instance is, you know, should think twice about it. I got a letter from the mother thanking me, saying I was wrong, the pictures stay up. What a feeling of power.
In HR Pufnstuf, she actually plays Witchy Poo. In Lidsville, she plays the sidekick character of the main character, Mark. Both HR Pufnstuf and Lidsville star a character who's supposed to be a teen boy, who was kind of a little bit of a child star when they were younger, but Jack Wilde, who played Jimmy in HR Pufnstuf, was,
I want to say, considerably more famous
than Butch Patrick in Lidsville. Both Lidsville and HR Pufnstuf have unfortunate racial stereotypes due to it being 1969 and 1971, and racial stereotypes were still
Funny.
Okay, so what I meant to say here is there are more dynamics in HR Pufnstuf than in Lidsville. Like, for example, both HR Pufnstuf and Lidsville are basically cat and mouse chases between Hoodoo or Witchy Poo and Mark or Jimmy, respectively. However, in HR Pufnstuf, you've got the cat, Witchy Poo, you've got the mouse, Jimmy, you've got Jimmy's protected treasure, which is the flute, and then you've got the mayor, and then you've got a wide variety of characters. In Lidsville, you've got the cat, Hoodoo, you've got the mouse, Mark, you've got Mark's sidekick / special possession, which is his genie named Weenie. And then you have a bunch of hats that have no personality whatsoever except for each individual stereotype, which you can tell by the shape of the hat.
I just want to go on a slight tangent. Whenever I upload pictures of Jack Wild as Jimmy to Pinterest, I call him Jimmy Jones. And I literally made it up. I made up the fact that his last name is Jones because I think it would be so funny if in 50 years, when
The children
are on Pinterest or social media or whatever, they want to know what Jimmy's last name from the ancient 1969 children's TV series HR Pufnstuf was. They're going to find out his last name is Jones, and they're going to think that's canon, even though some kid in the 2020s literally just invented it.
One pretty big difference between HR Pufnstuf and Lidsville is that both had pretty different audiences. HR Pufnstuf was pretty clearly meant for children between the ages of 3 and 7, whereas Lidsville, it was a bit more confusing, because Lidsville was a bit less organized than HR Pufnstuf, so older kids wouldn't be able to take it as seriously. But at the same time, there was a lot of disturbing imagery and an overall darker atmosphere in Lidsville than HR Pufnstuf that might make it kind of scary for kids. So, I think what happened was when Sid and Marty Krofft made the sweet and harmless, innocent, bright and beautiful HR Pufnstuf for children, they got a bunch of letters from college kids and teenagers saying,
Oh yeah, I mean, we love your show. We go on psychedelics and we trip out while we watch it.
and they realized, well maybe when these kids who watched HR Pufnstuf in 1969 will grow up and be 9-year-olds in 1971 and go on psychedelics and enjoy Lidsville.
HR Pufnstuf itself, it's named after the mayor, but a lot of people speculated that it sounded like puffing stuff. And Sid and Marty Krofft were like, no, it's not, we're not at all affiliated with drugs.
I mean, we may have done drugs on set.
What?
So where did Lidsville come from? Well, after HR Pufnstuf ended because, I don't know, I guess Jack Wild was getting a deeper voice or something, and they also ran out of ideas. I mean, HR Pufnstuf literally ended with this episode called Jimmy Who, where basically Jimmy gets amnesia, and the entire episode is the HR Pufnstuf townsfolk trying to remind Jimmy of who he is by bringing up old songs from the past. I mean, if you were going to make this the final episode, then let Jimmy go home, because Jack Wild was getting a bit bigger at the time, and he was doing more gigs and stuff. Around the same time, Sid and Marty Krofft are working on this full-length movie of Pufnstuf, and then that ends, and they basically are done with Jack Wild. Then Sid and Marty Krofft come up with this idea to do a band of teenagers.
But for kids?
The Bugaloos?
What is it about 1970s children's shows and tight clothing?
The Bugaloos was not nearly as successful as HR Pufnstuf. The Bugaloos definitely seemed more for an audience range of 1 to 4. So then Lidsville is born out of the idea of Sid wondering, what a world where hats have different personalities would be like. Lidsville literally comes from lid, like
The even older slang for hat.
I can also imagine they were like, well, how can we make this successful? Well, we had a really successful show in the past that had this cute teen boy that everybody fell in love with.
So we need to bring a cute teen boy back.
They wanted to get Mark Lester, who was Jack Wild's opposite in both Oliver and Melody. And Mark Lester would have been a good option, but
Mark Lester was just too cool.
so they decided to get Butch Patrick. Now, unlike Jack Wild, Butch Patrick was really on the declining end of stardom, and Jack Wild was on the growing side of stardom. Butch Patrick was the little bat boy or vampire boy in Munsters, which was a 60s family sitcom similar to a lot of other family sitcoms of the 50s and 60s. The problem with Butch Patrick, though, is even though he was 18 at the time and Jack was 16 to 17 at the time of his filming, Butch actually looked his age.
He looked like an 18-year-old frolicking around in a children's show.
Which is a little bit less appealing than somebody who looks like an 11 or 12-year-old frolicking around in a children's show.
So, a little bit of backstory. So Jack Wilde, I personally believe, was a late bloomer. However, around 17, 18, and 19, during his most critical years of growth spurt and getting a deeper voice and such, he was involved in a lot of heavy drinking, which I think stunted his growth. As a result, he ended up being between 5'3" and 5'5". We're not exactly sure, but Google seems to think he's 5'8", although pictures and videos clearly show him being shorter than 5'8". Had he not been so involved with heavy drinking, he would have probably gained a few inches, and also he probably would have had a less childish face and stature. Butch Patrick, on the other hand, has a more mature face and a more adult-like stature, making him actually look like an 18-year-old, whereas Jack looked several years younger.
Another difference is that Jack looked very natural on screen, and Butch looked very forced and very uncomfortable. It could be because Jack is a stronger actor than Butch, and even though I kind of think this is true, I think more importantly the environment was very different. On the set of HR Pufnstuf, everybody was a family. On the set of Lidsville, everything was a lot more awkward. First of all, the episodes were shot out of order. Multiple scenes for different episodes would be shot in the same place to, I guess, make
Get more convenient.
But then you would get characters who are trying to memorize scripts out of order, so they don't really know what's going on. So they can't embrace their character because they don't understand the scene they are in. Also had a lot more little people,
So people with dwarfism, people with different types of conditions that made them shorter than average.
so that everyone could look like a little hat, but it also made distinguishing each character very difficult. Lidsville had live voiceovers. The voice actors would actually get behind the camera and voice over for the different hats, and the hats wouldn't know which one's turn it was to show body language, and Butch wouldn't know which hat to look at. Butch also hated working there so much, and it shows because his acting is very forced. It very much looks like a young adult or a much older kid being forced to work on a children's TV series and act younger than he is. Butch also could not sing and could not dance. Two skills that Jack Wilde was very skilled in at the time, which made him a less interesting person to watch. And since a lot of the episodes from Lidsville had similar tropes and storylines to the episodes of HR Pufnstuf, it was very much unintentionally a remake of HR Pufnstuf. A remake that nobody wanted because it was an attempt to be as successful as HR Pufnstuf with way fewer resources. Lidsville is just a gluten-free version of HR Pufnstuf. Talk about things without bothering people.
Ending this video, I'm looking for clips of HR Pufnstuf to put in this video, and I just found every single episode of HR Pufnstuf because all of them were taken off YouTube because Sid and Marty Krofft took them down because they didn't like how other people were watching them and not giving them money. But I found them all, and I found like full-length movies of like some of the videos that Jack Wilde was in that, like, you know, you'd have to buy on eBay because they're not in the library and they're not in any bookstore or anything. So I'm not obsessed. Shut up. You're obsessed.